The sharp whine of an impact wrench sliced through the humid air of Harper's Auto Repair, a modest garage tucked on the edge of Willow Creek, a small American town where pickup trucks outnumbered people. Grease-stained concrete floors gleamed. Under flickering neon lights and the faint scent of motor oil mingled with the metallic tang of tools. It was late morning, and the shop buzzed with the chaotic rhythm of clanging metal, muttered curses, and the occasional burst of laughter from the mechanics. Amid the organized chaos, Ethan Carter, 24, stood hunched over the open hood of a rusted Ford pickup, his calloused hands deftly wrestling a stubborn alternator into submission. His navy work shirt, already blotched with oil, clung to his lean frame, and a streak of grease smeared his cheek like war paint. Ethan's hazel eyes, sharp and focused, betrayed a mind that moved faster than his hands, a mind that didn't just fix cars, but saw them as puzzles, begging to be solved. Ethan had been at Harper's for 3 years, long enough to know every creak of the shop's aging lifts and every quirk of its temperamental coffee machine. He was damn good at his job, but what set him apart wasn't just skill. It was the fire in his gut when he saw something wrong, a spark that could flare into a full-blown blaze if pushed too far. Today, that spark was smoldering. He'd just found a loose wiring harness in the pickup, a sloppy oversight from the previous shift. It wasn't the first time he'd caught someone cutting corners, and it wouldn't be the last. But it grated on him, like sand in a gearbox, because Ethan believed in doing things right, even when no one was watching. Across the shop, Greg Marshall, the stocky, perpetually scowling manager, leaned against the counter, barking orders into a phone. His voice carried over the din, sharp and impatient. "No, we don't do payment plans. Cash up front or nothing." Greg's pressed polo shirt and slick-back hair stood in stark contrast to the greasy chaos of the garage, a reminder. He saw himself above the wrench turners he managed. Ethan glanced over, his jaw tightening as he overheard Greg's tone. The guy ran the shop like it was his personal ATM, squeezing every dollar out of customers and riding the mechanics to hit quotas. Ethan had learned early on that Greg didn't bend not for customers, not for employees, and certainly not for fairness. In the corner of the bay, a younger mechanic, Tommy Hayes, fumbled with a tire balancer, his nervous energy palpable. Tommy was barely 20, fresh out of trade school, with a mop of curly brown hair and eyes that darted like a spooked deer's whenever Greg was around. He'd started at Harper's 6 months ago, and Ethan had taken him under his wing, partly because he saw potential in the kid, partly because he knew what it was like to be the new guy under Greg's thumb. Tommy caught Ethan's eye, offering a quick, awkward grin before dropping a lug nut, which skittered across the floor. Ethan shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. The kid would learn, but not if Greg kept breathing down his neck. Ethan's thoughts drifted as he tightened the bolt, his mind flickering to a memory from years ago, a memory that still stung. He'd been 19, sitting in a community college classroom, sketching engine designs in the margins of his notebook, dreaming of becoming a mechanical engineer. That dream had died the day his mother, Ellen, was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Medical bills piled up faster than he could work part-time jobs, and college became a luxury he couldn't afford. So, he traded textbooks for wrenches, lecture halls for this grease-stained garage, and ambition for survival. Every paycheck went to Ellen's care and the student loans he'd never finished paying off. Ethan didn't regret it, not really, but sometimes, late at night, he wondered what might have been. His reverie was broken by the jangle of the shop's bell as the glass door swung open. An elderly man, Harold Jenkins, shuffled in, clutching a worn leather wallet. His gray hair was thinning, his tweed jacket threadbare at the elbows, and his scuffed loafers spoke of years of careful use. Harold's hands trembled slightly as he approached the counter, his voice soft but steady. I need a belt replaced on my sedan. It's making a god-awful noise, and I can't get to the hospital without it. Greg didn't even look up from his clipboard. Belt replacement's $100, labor and parts. Cash or card, up front. Harold's face fell, his fingers fumbling with the wallet. I can pay half now, the rest next week when my pension comes in. It's not a big job, right? Greg snorted, crossing his arms. This ain't a charity, old man. Pay in full or take your car somewhere else. Ethan, wiping his hands on a rag, felt that familiar spark ignite. He'd heard this song and danced before, Greg turning away customers who couldn't pay on the spot, no matter how small the job. Harold's shoulders slumped, and Ethan caught the glint of desperation in the old man's eyes. Without thinking, he stepped forward, the rag still in his hands. I'll do it. Harold turned, startled, his bushy eyebrows rising. Son, I don't want you getting in trouble. Ethan shook his head, his voice firm but kind. It's a 15-minute job. Don't worry about it. Greg's face darkened, his eyes narrowing. Carter, don't be stupid. You do this for free. It's coming out of your check. Ethan didn't flinch. Fine. Take it out of my check. Greg scoffed, his lip curling, but he didn't push further. He knew Ethan was stubborn as a rusted bolt, and frankly, he didn't care enough to argue over a belt. Ethan grabbed his tools and headed to Harold's silver sedan, its hood already propped open like a patient waiting for surgery. As he worked, he caught Harold watching, the old man's hands no longer trembling but clasping together in quiet gratitude. Unbeknownst to anyone in the shop, another pair of eyes was watching too. A man in a faded mechanic's uniform sat in the waiting area, his tall frame slouched in a plastic chair. His beard was streaked with gray, his face weathered but sharp, like a blade dulled by time but still dangerous. To the others, he was just another new hire, a trainee named Jim Sullivan, blending into the background. But Jim was no trainee. He was James Sullivan, the owner of Harper's Auto Repair and 5 other locations across the state. For 10 years, he'd run the business from afar, trusting managers like Greg to keep things humming. He'd bought the chain from a friend who believed in honest work, in fixing cars to fix lives. But lately, complaints had trickled in over priced repairs, shoddy service, employees quitting without notice. So James had done something he'd never done before. He went undercover. No one in the shop recognized him. To them, he was just another name on a paycheck, a corporate ghost. As he sat there, sipping burnt coffee from a styrofoam cup, James watched Ethan work. He saw the way the young mechanic's hands moved with precision, the way he spoke to Harold with respect, not pity. James's sharp eyes missed nothing, not Greg's dismissive attitude, not Tommy's nervous glances, and certainly not the quiet defiance in Ethan's stance. This wasn't just about a belt. It was about a culture rotting from the inside. And James was starting to see where the problem lay. As Ethan tightened the new belt, Harold approached, his voice thick with emotion. Son, you didn't have to do that. Ethan shrugged, wiping his hands. Yeah, I did. Harold reached into his pocket, pulling out a crumpled $5 bill. It's not much, but Ethan pushed the bill back gently. Just drive safe, all right? Harold hesitated, then nodded, his eyes misty. Thank you. As the old man drove off, James leaned back, crossing his arms. This wasn't just one act of kindness. It was a glimpse into the kind of man Ethan was and the kind of shop Harper's could be. The garage's pulse kept beating, but James knew. It was time for a tune-up. Something was broken here, and he wasn't leaving until it was fixed. The air in Harper's Auto Repair grew heavier as the morning bled into afternoon, the hum of tools and the low drone of a radio playing classic rock filling the garage. Ethan Carter tightened the bolt on a Chevy's engine, his hands moving with the precision of a surgeon, but his mind was elsewhere. The memory of Harold Jenkins's grateful nod lingered, A small victory in a shop that felt increasingly like a battlefield. Ethan's hazel eyes flicked toward the counter, where Greg Marshall, the manager, was counting cash from the morning's jobs, his fingers moving with the greed of a card shark. Greg's presence was a constant weight, his voice a grating reminder of the shop's skewed priorities: profit over people. Always. Tommy Hayes, the young mechanic Ethan had taken under his wing, was wrestling with a stuck oil filter nearby, his face flushed with effort. "This thing's fighting me harder than my ex," Tommy muttered, earning a half smile from Ethan. But the smile faded as Ethan caught Greg's voice cutting through the shop's noise, sharp and dismissive. "No, we don't do half payments. Take it or leave it." Ethan's grip on his wrench tightened. He'd heard that tone too many times, and it always meant someone was getting screwed. At the counter stood Harold Jenkins, the elderly man from earlier, back sooner than expected. His silver sedan was parked in the lot, its engine still ticking from the drive. Harold's hands trembled as he clutched his worn wallet, his voice low but resolute. "It's not about the belt," he said, his eyes pleading. "The car's still making a noise, something in the alternator, I think. I needed to get to the hospital. My wife, she's got a treatment tomorrow, and I can't miss it." Greg leaned back, arms crossed, his polo shirt straining against his stocky frame. "Alternator's a bigger job. $400 minimum. Pay up front or you're walking." Harold's shoulders sagged, his fingers fumbling with the wallet. "I can give you $200 now. I'll have the rest next week, I swear." Greg snorted, his lip curling. "What part of no charity don't you get, old man? Take your junker somewhere else." Ethan's blood boiled. He dropped his wrench onto the workbench with a clatter, drawing Tommy's wide-eyed glance. Harold's mention of the hospital hit Ethan like a punch. He knew that desperation, the kind that came from watching someone you love slip away. His mother, Ellen, had spent too many nights in hospital beds, her multiple sclerosis stealing her strength while Ethan scrambled to cover the bills. He stepped forward, wiping his hands on a rag, his voice steady but edged with defiance. "I'll take a look, Harold. No charge." Harold's eyes widened, a mix of gratitude and worry. "Son, I don't want you in hot water with your boss." Ethan shook his head, already moving toward the sedan. "It's a quick check. Don't worry about it." Greg's face twisted, his voice low and venomous. "Carter, you pull this stunt again. It's not just your paycheck taking a hit. You're out the door." Ethan met Greg's glare, unflinching. "Then take it out of my check. Again." Greg's jaw worked, but he didn't push further. "Hey," muttered something under his breath and stormed back to the counter, leaving Ethan to pop the Sten's hood. As he leaned in, listening to the engine's faint whine, he caught a glimpse of a man in the waiting area, a tall figure in a faded mechanic's uniform, his gray-streaked beard and weathered face blending into the background. Jim Sullivan, the supposed trainee, sipped his coffee, his sharp eyes tracking every move in the shop. Ethan barely registered him, too focused on the alternator, but Jim James Sullivan, the undercover owner of Harper's Auto Repair, was taking mental notes. He'd seen Ethan's act of kindness earlier, and now he was watching it happen again. This wasn't just a mechanic fixing cars. This was a man fighting a system that didn't deserve him. Ethan confirmed the issue, a loose alternator bearing. An easy fix with the right tools. He worked quickly, his hands a blur, and within 15 minutes, the sedan purred smoothly. Harold clasped Ethan's hand, his voice thick. "My wife, Clara. She's all I've got left. I can't thank you." "Enough." Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just get to the hospital safe, all right?" Harold hesitated, then pulled out a crumpled $10 bill. Ethan pushed it back gently. "Save it for Clara's flowers or something." As Harold drove off, James leaned back in his chair, his coffee long gone cold. He'd bought this chain. A decade ago to honor his late friend Tom Harper, who believed a garage could be more than a business, a place to help people, to fix what was broken in their lives as much as in their cars. But the complaints flooding his inbox told a different story. Overcharges, shoddy work, unhappy employees. James had trusted managers like Greg to run things, but now, watching Ethan, he saw the gap between what was and what could be. The shop's rhythm shifted as the afternoon wore on. A blue SUV pulled into the bay, its driver, Sarah Mitchell, stepping out with a tense expression. She was in her mid-30s, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, her hands clutching her keys like a lifeline. Ethan approached, wiping his hands. On his rag, his tone light to ease her nerves. "Something wrong with the car?" Sarah hesitated, glancing at the counter where Greg was back on his phone. "It's making a weird noise when I turn. I just need it checked. I've got to pick up my kid from school later." Before Ethan could respond, Greg materialized, his voice all business. "Inspection's $80, lady. Non-refundable." Sarah's eyes widened. 80? Just to look at it? Greg shrugged, unfazed. "Shop policy." Ethan's jaw clenched. He knew that policy was just Greg's way of padding the bill. He stepped under the SUV's hood, listening as Sarah started the engine and turned the wheel. The faint groan was unmistakable low-power steering fluid, a 5-minute fix. He straightened, turning to Sarah. "It's just low fluid. I can top it off right now, no charge." Greg's voice cut in like a blade. "That's a full power. Steering flush, Carter. $150. Ethan spun, his temper flaring. "She doesn't need a flush. It's a top off, Greg. $5 worth of fluid." Greg crossed his arms, his face reddening. "Not your call. We charge for the full service, or we don't do it." Sarah looked between them, her discomfort palpable. I can't afford that right now," she admitted, her voice small. "I'm a teacher, and they just cut my second job. I need the car for my son." Ethan exhaled sharply, his hands clenching at his sides. He could feel Tommy watching, the kid's nervous energy practically vibrating across the bay. James, still in the waiting area, leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. Ethan turned to Sarah, keeping his voice calm but firm. "Go to the auto parts store down the street. Buy a bottle of power steering fluid. It's like $5. Pour it in yourself. You don't need anything else." Greg's face turned purple. "Are you serious right now, Carter? You're costing us money." "I'm being honest, Ethan." Shot back, his voice low but unyielding. "Someone's gotta be." Sarah gave Ethan a grateful look, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "Thank you," she whispered before hurrying out, keys still clutched tightly. The moment she was gone, Greg stepped closer, his voice a hiss. "You keep pulling stunts like that, you're done here. I don't care how good you are with a wrench." Ethan held his ground, his eyes locked on Greg's. "Maybe you should care about doing the job right." Greg scoffed, turning away, but the tension hung in the air like exhaust fumes. Tommy sidled up to Ethan, his voice barely above a whisper. "Man, you're gonna get yourself fired. Greg's been here forever." Ethan didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the SUV's empty bay. He knew Tommy was right, but he couldn't shake the image of Sarah's worried face or Harold's trembling hands. Doing the right thing shouldn't feel like a rebellion, but in this shop, it did. James, still unnoticed in the waiting area, scribbled a note in his head. Ethan Carter, honest to a fault. Greg Marshall, problem. He'd seen enough to know this. Wasn't just one bad day. The shop's culture was rotten, and Greg was at the root. But Ethan was something else. A spark in a dark engine, one James intended to fan into a flame dot as the afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the garage. Ethan returned to his workbench, his hands moving mechanically, but his mind racing. He didn't know it yet, but he'd just caught the attention of the one man who could change everything. And in a shop built on quick fixes and quicker profits, that attention was about to set off a chain reaction. The fluorescent lights of Harper's Auto Repair buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow across the garage as the afternoon dragged into early evening. The rhythmic clank of tools had slowed, but the air still carried the weight of unspoken tensions. Ethan Carter leaned against a workbench, cleaning a socket wrench with a rag, his hazel eyes distant but sharp. The confrontations with Greg Marshall, earlier first over Harold Jenkins's alternator, then Sarah Mitchell's power steering fluid, had left a bitter taste, like oil lingering on his tongue. Ethan knew he was walking a tightrope, each act of Defiance pushing him closer to the edge of Greg's patience. The backing down wasn't in his nature, not when people were being fleeced for no reason other than greed. Tommy Hayes, the rookie mechanic, hovered nearby, tightening a lug nut on a tire with more force than necessary. His curly hair was damp with sweat, and his nervous energy seemed to vibrate through the bay. "You really told Greg off today, man," Tommy sighed, his voice low, glancing toward the counter where Greg was flipping through paperwork. "I thought he was going to fire you on the spot." Ethan snorted, tossing the rag onto the bench. "He's been threatening that for years. Hasn't done it yet." Tommy hesitated, his wrench pausing mid-turn. "Yeah, but you keep pushing." "Ethan, guys like Greg, they don't forget." Ethan met Tommy's eyes, seeing the kid's worry but also a flicker of admiration. He softened his tone. "If I don't push Tommy, who will? You see how he treats people." Tommy nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the tire. Ethan could tell the kid wanted to say more, but fear of Greg's wrath kept him quiet. It was a fear Ethan understood. Most of the mechanics at Harper's had bills to pay, families to feed. Rocking the boat meant risking everything. But Ethan couldn't shake the image of Harold's trembling hands or Sarah's relief when he'd saved her from Greg's inflated charges. Doing the right thing wasn't just a choice. It was a necessity like air in his lungs. Across the shop, a man in a faded mechanic's uniform sat quietly, blending into the chaos like a shadow. Jim Sullivan, known to everyone as a new trainee, was no ordinary worker. As James Sullivan, the owner of Harper's Auto Repair and its 5 sister locations, he'd spent the day observing, his gray-streaked beard and weathered face masking the sharp mind beneath. James had bought this chain a decade ago to honor his friend, Tom Harper, a man who saw garages as community lifelines, places where trust was built one repair at a time. But the flood of complaints, overpriced services, shoddy work, high employee turnover had forced James to step out of his corporate office and into the trenches. He'd chosen to go undercover, a decision born of necessity. His managers, like Greg, had never met him in person. To them, he was just a signature on their paychecks. That anonymity was his advantage. James sipped from a styrofoam cup, the coffee, long gone bitter, and watched Ethan with growing interest. The young mechanic's defiance wasn't reckless bravado. It was rooted in a moral clarity James hadn't seen in years. Ethan's actions with Harold and Sarah had confirmed what James suspected. The shop's problems weren't just bad management. They were a betrayal of everything Harper's was meant to stand for. Greg's dismissive attitude, his obsession with profit over service, was a cancer spreading through the garage. But Ethan was the antidote, a spark James intended to nurture. Shop's rhythm shifted as the glass door jingled, admitting a new customer. Daniel Brooks, a man in his early 40s, strode in, his button-down shirt slightly wrinkled, his jaw set with barely contained frustration. He carried a folded receipt, its edges worn from handling, and his boots echoed on the concrete floor as he approached the counter. Greg looked up, his usual smirk fading at Daniel's expression. "Something we can do for you?" Greg asked, his tone guarded.
Daniel slapped the receipt onto the counter.
Yeah, you can explain why I paid $600 for a brake job last week, and now my car's grinding like it's chewing gravel. I took it to another shop. They said the rotors you charged me for weren't replaced. Ethan, tightening a bolt nearby, froze, his ears pricking at Daniel's words. Tommy glanced over, his wrench slipping slightly. James, still in the waiting area, leaned forward, his coffee cup forgotten. The garage seemed to hold its breath. Greg barely glanced at the receipt, his voice smooth but edged with irritation. That's not possible. We do everything by the Finter's book here. Maybe that other shop's trying to scam you. Daniel's eyes narrowed, his voice rising. They showed me the rotors. They're the same rusted ones I had before. I'm not an idiot, and I want answers. Ethan straightened, his heart pounding. He'd seen this before. Greg's playbook was to deny, deflect, and dismiss. But Daniel wasn't backing down, and Ethan couldn't stay silent. He walked over, ignoring Tommy's whispered, "Don't," and stood beside the counter. "Mind if I take a look at the service records?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. Greg's head snapped toward him, his face darkening. "Stay out of this, Carter. This is company business." Daniel tapped the receipt, his voice steady but tight. "I want to see the records." "If I paid for new rotors, prove it." Greg's smirk returned, colder now. "Service records are internal. We don't just hand them out." Ethan's temper flared, but before he could speak, James stood, his presence quiet but commanding. He adjusted his trainee's cap, his voice casual but pointed. "That's not true. Customers have a right to see their records." Greg spun, his eyes narrowing. "Who the hell are you to talk, newbie?" James didn't flinch, his gaze steady. "Just someone who knows the rules." Ethan seized the moment, stepping behind the counter to the computer. "I'll pull the records," he said, his fingers already typing. Greg grabbed his arm, but Ethan shook him off, his voice low. "Back off, Greg." The shop went quiet, the other mechanics pausing to watch. Tommy hovered nearby, his eyes wide, torn between fear and awe. Ethan found the file, scanning it quickly. His stomach sank. The invoice listed new rotors, but the parts inventory showed no corresponding purchase. He turned to Daniel. "You're right. The rotors weren't replaced." Daniel's shoulders relaxed slightly, but his anger didn't fade. "So you charged me for nothing?" Greg's face reddened, his voice rising. "This is bull, Carter. You're making this up to make me look bad." Ethan held up the screen, his voice steady. "The numbers don't lie, Greg. You billed him for parts we never used." The garage erupted in murmurs, the other mechanics exchanging glances. James, still standing, noted the shift in the room. Ethan's move wasn't just bold. It was a public challenge to Greg's authority. Daniel nodded, his voice calmer but firm. "I want my money back, and I want this fixed." Greg scoffed, stepping closer to Ethan, his voice a hiss. "You're done here, Carter. Pack your stuff." Before Ethan could respond, Tommy spoke up, his voice trembling but clear. "He's not wrong, Greg. I've seen you do this before, billing for stuff we didn't do. Like that transmission job last month." The words hung in the air, a crack in the shop's fragile loyalty. Greg's eyes widened, his bravado faltering. "You too, Hayes. You're both out of your minds." James stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "No one's getting fired. Not yet." He turned to Daniel, his tone professional but warm. "You'll get your refund, sir." "I'll make sure of it." Daniel blinked, confused. "And who are you?" James's lips twitched, but he didn't answer. "Someone who's been watching." Greg's face twisted, but he backed off, muttering under his breath as he retreated to the office. Ethan exhaled, his hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. He glanced at Tommy, who gave a small, nervous nod. "Thanks, kid," Ethan said quietly. Tommy shrugged, a faint grin breaking through. Figured it was time to grow a spine. James returned to his seat, his mind racing. Ethan's courage, Tommy's unexpected stand, Daniel's justified anger, it all painted a clearer picture. Greg wasn't just a bad manager. He was running a scam, and the shop's culture had enabled it. James thought of Tom Harper, his friend, who'd built this chain on trust. Every overcharge, every lie, was a betrayal of that legacy. But Ethan and now Tommy were proof that legacy could be reclaimed dawn as the evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the garage. Ethan returned to his workbench, his mind a storm of doubt and resolve. He'd crossed the line. Today, and there was no going back. Greg's threat echoed in his ears, but so did Daniel's gratitude, Tommy's shaky courage. Ethan didn't know it yet, but he just lit a fuse, one that James Sullivan was ready to ignite. In the waiting area, James scribbled a mental note. Greg Marshall must go. Ethan Carter is the future. The garage's pulse quickened, and James knew the real work was about to begin. The air in Harper's auto repair crackled with tension, the usual clatter of tools replaced by a heavy silence that pressed against the concrete walls. The confrontation with Daniel Brooks had left the garage on edge, the mechanic's eyes darting. Between Ethan Carter, Greg Marshall, and the customer whose demand for justice hung like a storm cloud. Ethan stood by the counter, his heart pounding, the computer screen still glowing with the damning evidence. An invoice for rotors never replaced, a lie etched in black and white. Daniel's arms were crossed, his weathered face set with determination, while Greg's usual smirk had twisted into something defensive, almost feral. Tommy Hayes lingered nearby, his wrench forgotten, his earlier defiance giving way to nervous anticipation. The shop's pulse had stopped, waiting for what came next. Ethan's voice, steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him, cut through the silence. "You owe this man a refund, Greg, and an apology." Greg's face flushed crimson, his fists clenching at his sides. "You don't run this shop, Carter. Keep your mouth shut before I shut it for you." Daniel stepped forward, his voice low but unyielding. "I'm not leaving until this is made right. I paid for a service I didn't get, and I've got a kid who needs me to get to his games safely." Before Greg could retort, a figure moved from the waiting area, his faded mechanic's uniform blending into the shop's chaos until now. Jim Sullivan, known to all as a quiet trainee, stood tall, his gray-streaked beard and weathered face carrying an authority no one had noticed before. His sharp eyes locked on Greg, and his voice, calm but commanding, sliced through the standoff. "Enough," Greg spun, his irritation flaring. "Stay out of this, newbie. This doesn't concern you." James Sullivan removed his grease-streaked cap, his posture shifting from unassuming to resolute. The simple act seemed to change the air, drawing every eye in the room. He stepped closer, his boots echoing on the concrete, and faced Daniel directly. "You're getting a full refund, sir. And we'll fix your brakes properly, no charge." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "And who are you to promise that?" James's lips twitched, a faint smile breaking through his stoic demeanor. "James Sullivan. I own Harper's Auto Repair. All 6 locations." The garage went deathly still, the words landing like a thunderclap. Greg's jaw dropped, his bravado crumbling. Tommy's eyes widened, his wrench slipping from his hand with a metallic clank. Ethan's breath caught, his mind racing to process. The revelation. The trainee who'd been sweeping floors and fetching tools was the owner? The mechanics exchanged stunned glances, the weight of the moment sinking in. Greg forced a laugh, but it came out hollow. "That's not funny, pal. You're out of your depth." James ignored him, his gaze steady on Daniel. "I've been here all day, watching, listening. What happened with your car isn't a mistake. It's a pattern." He turned to Greg. his voice hardening. Overcharging customers, billing for work that never happened, threatening employees who speak up. That's not how my company runs. Greg's face paled, but he scrambled to recover. Look, Mr. Sullivan, if that's really you, this is just a misunderstanding. Maybe one of the techs screwed up the paperwork. I've been following company policy. James cut him off, his voice like steel. I write company policy. And what you've been doing, that's theft. He gestured toward Ethan, his tone softening but firm. This man, Ethan, has been doing the right thing all day, helping an old man who couldn't pay, saving a mother from your inflated charges, calling out your scam on this break job. He's the only one here acting like this shop has a soul. Ethan's chest tightened, the praise unexpected and heavy. He glanced at Tommy, who gave a small, odd nod, then at Daniel, whose expression had softened into gratitude. Greg, cornered, tried to shift blame. Carter's been undermining me from day one. He's the one causing trouble, giving freebies, talking back. Enough, James snapped, his patience gone. You're done, Greg. Pack your things and leave, now. Greg froze, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. You can't just fire me on the spot. I've been here for years. James stepped closer, his voice low and final. I can, and I am. You've been running this place like your personal piggy bank, and it stops today. Get out before I call the sheriff to audit every invoice you've touched. The threat landed hard, and Greg's defiance crumbled. He grabbed his jacket from the office, muttering curses, and stormed out, the glass door slamming behind him. The shop exhaled, the tension breaking like a snapped cable. The mechanics murmured, some relieved, others stunned, as the reality of Greg's dismissal sank in. James turned to Daniel, his tone professional but warm. I'm sorry for what you've been through. I'll personally review your service records, and we'll make this right. New rotors, full inspection on the house. Daniel nodded, his anger easing. That's all I wanted. Thank you. As Daniel stepped aside to speak with a technician, James faced Ethan, his sharp eyes assessing. You've been here 3 years, Ethan. Ever get a promotion? Ethan shook, his head still processing the whirlwind. No, sir. James nodded, as if confirming something to himself. That's a shame. You're the only one here with any integrity. He paused, his voice taking on a new weight. How do you feel about running this shop? Ethan's brow furrowed, the question hitting like a wrench to the chest. What? I need someone who cares about customers, about doing the job. Right, James said. Someone who won't let people get ripped off. You've proven yourself today more than once. You up for it? Ethan's mind reeled. Running the shop? He was just a mechanic, a guy who fixed cars and tried to sleep at night knowing he'd done right by people. But the weight of James's words, the memory of Harold's gratitude, Sarah's relief, Daniel's trust, it all pressed against him, urging him forward. He glanced at Tommy, who gave a subtle thumbs up. Then at the other mechanics, their eyes watching with a mix of curiosity and hope. Yeah, Ethan said finally, his voice steadying. I'm in. James extended a hand, and Ethan clasped it, the handshake sealing a shift that felt bigger than the garage itself. We'll talk details tomorrow, James said. For now, finish your shift. You've got a shop to keep running. Ethan nodded, a mix of adrenaline and disbelief coursing through him. As James stepped back, addressing the other mechanics, Ethan returned to his workbench, his hands moving mechanically, but his mind racing. The shop felt different now, like the air had cleared after a storm. James's voice carried across the bay, firm but encouraging. Things are changing, folks. If you've been doing your job right, you've got nothing to worry about. But if you've been cutting corners, you won't last long. The message was clear, and the mechanics nodded, some with relief. others with uneased dot as the evening wore on. Tommy sidled up to Ethan, his grin wide. "You're the boss now, huh?" "Never saw that coming." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "Neither did I, kid." "Neither did I." In the waiting area, James sat down, his cap back on, but his presence no longer invisible. He thought of Tom Harper, his friend who'd believed in this shop's potential to be more than a business. Today, James had taken the first step toward honoring that vision, but he knew the work wasn't done. Greg's dismissal was a start, but the rot ran deeper: other shops, other managers, other lies. And Ethan, with his stubborn integrity, was the key to rooting it out. As the garage's lights flickered, signaling the end of the shift, Ethan locked up his tools, his movements slower, more deliberate. He'd started the day as just another mechanic, fighting battles he wasn't sure he could win. Now, he was something else, someone with a chance to change things, to make Harper's what it should have been all along. Outside, the night air was cool, the distant hum of traffic a quiet contrast to the shop's earlier chaos. James stood by his truck, watching Ethan lock the door. Their eyes met briefly, a silent understanding passing between them. The reckoning had come, and with it, a new beginning. But for Ethan, the real challenge was just starting, and James knew he'd be there to see it through. The morning sun filtered through the grimy windows of Harper's Auto Repair, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. The garage was quieter than usual, the clatter of tools subdued as if the shop itself were holding its breath. Ethan Carter stood at the counter, a clipboard in hand, his navy work shirt still stained with oil, but his posture straighter, more deliberate. At 24, he'd never imagined himself as anything but a wrench-turner, fixing cars to keep his mother's medical bills at bay. But now, less than a day after James Sullivan's bombshell revelation and Greg Marshall's unceremonious exit, Ethan was the manager of Harper's. The weight of it pressed against his chest, not crushing but grounding, like a perfectly balanced engine. The shop felt different without Greg's looming presence, but the absence of his barked orders left an uneasy void. The mechanics moved through their tasks with cautious glances, their eyes lingering on Ethan as if seeing him for the first time. Tommy Hayes, the young mechanic who'd found his voice yesterday, was already at work on a sedan's brakes, his curly hair tucked under a cap. He shot Ethan a quick grin, a silent vote of confidence, but not everyone was as welcoming. Mike Larson, a grizzled veteran with 20 years at Harper's, leaned against a lift, his arms crossed, his weathered face unreadable. Mike had kept quiet during Greg's reign, doing just enough to avoid trouble. Now, his silence felt like a challenge. Ethan cleared his throat, setting the clipboard down. "All right, everyone, let's huddle up before we open." The mechanics gathered reluctantly, their boots scuffing the floor. Ethan's heart raced, but he kept his voice steady. "Things are going to change around here," he began, meeting their eyes. "No more overcharging. No more billing for work we didn't do. If you've been pressured into that stuff before, come clean now. No one's getting fired for being honest." The words hung in the air, met with nods from some like Tommy and skeptical squints from others. Mike spoke up, his voice gruff. "Sounds nice, Carter, but you think corporate's gonna let you run this place like a charity? We've got quotas." Ethan held his gaze, refusing to flinch. "James Sullivan's backing this. He wants the shop done right, not just profitable. You got a problem with that? Take it up with him." Mike snorted but didn't push further. The meeting broke up, and the mechanics returned to their bays, the shop's rhythm slowly resuming. Ethan exhaled, his hand shaking slightly as he picked up the clipboard. Leading wasn't like fixing a car. There was no manual, no clear fix. But he'd seen what Greg's way did to people like Hal Jenkins and Sarah Mitchell. He wasn't about to let that happen again. James Sullivan arrived mid-morning, his faded mechanic's uniform replaced by a crisp button-down, though his gray-streaked beard and sharp eyes remained unchanged. He carried a stack of folders, his presence commanding but not overbearing. "Morning, Ethan," he said, setting the folders on the counter. "Ready to dig into the mess Greg left?" Ethan nodded, though his stomach churned. "What have we got?" James opened a folder, revealing a spreadsheet of service orders. "I pulled records from the last 6 months. There's a patent parts bill but never used, services charged without documentation. Your call out on Daniel Brooks's rotors was just the tip of the iceberg." Ethan scanned the numbers, his jaw tightening. How many customers got screwed? "Too many," James said, his voice heavy. "We're refunding every questionable charge, starting with Brooks. It'll cost us, but it's the only way to rebuild trust." Ethan respected that. He'd dealt with enough bosses who'd rather bury mistakes than own them. What about the other shops? "Same problem?" James's eyes darkened. "I'm sending teams to audit them, but I need this place to be the model. Show the others how it's done." The weight of that settled on Ethan's shoulders. He wasn't just fixing one shop. He was setting a standard for the entire chain. As James left to make calls, Ethan dove into the records, cross-referencing invoices with inventory logs. The discrepancies were blatant. Brake pads billed but never ordered. Oil changes charged at double rates. Each line was a betrayal, a reminder of Greg's greed. Ethan's anger flared, but so did his resolve. He started a list of affected customers, determined to make things right. Midday brought a familiar face, Harold Jenkins, the elderly man whose sedan Ethan had fixed twice. Harold shuffled in, his tweed jacket as worn as ever, but his eyes held a quiet warmth. "Heard you're the boss now," he said, a faint smile creasing his face. Ethan chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Trying to be. How's the car?" "Running smooth, thanks to you," Harold said. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, faded photo of a woman with kind eyes. "This is Clara, my wife. She's why I keep coming back. Thought you should see who you're helping." Ethan took the photo, his throat tightening. Clara's smile was a mirror to his mother's, and the gesture hit harder than he expected. "She's lucky to have you," he said, handing it back. Harold shook his head. "We're the lucky ones, son. Don't let this place change you." As Harold left, Ethan tucked the memory away, a reminder of why he'd taken this job. But the moment of warmth was short-lived. Mike Larson approached, his expression sour. "You're really gonna refund all those people? We'll be in the red for months." Ethan met his gaze, his voice firm. "We're doing what's right, Mike. If you don't like it, there's the door." Mike's eyes narrowed, but he backed off, muttering under his breath. Ethan knew the veteran wasn't convinced, and others shared his skepticism. Change was hard, especially for those who'd grown comfortable under Greg's rules. Tommy, though, was a different story. The kid caught Ethan later, his voice eager. "I went through the parts logs, like you asked. Found a batch of fake filters Greg was using, cheap knockoffs, billed as premium." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Show me." Tommy led him to the storage room, pulling out a box of air filters that looked convincing but felt flimsy. He'd swap these in, charge full price, and pocket the difference, Tommy said, his nervousness replaced by indignation. Ethan nodded, impressed. "Good catch, Tommy. We're tossing these and ordering real ones. Keep digging." Tommy grinned, a spark of confidence igniting. Ethan saw potential in him, a younger version of himself, someone who just needed a push to believe in their own worth. But the victory was overshadowed by a new challenge. A customer, irate and red-faced, stormed in, slamming a receipt on the counter. "You charged me for a transmission flush I didn't need. My car's worse now than before." Ethan handled it, promising a review and a fix. but the incident underscored the shop's damaged reputation. Word of Greg's firing had spread, and customers were coming forward, emboldened but wary. Ethan spent the afternoon fielding calls, logging complaints, and scheduling free repairs. Each one was a step toward redemption, but the sheer volume was daunting. By evening, James returned, his expression a mix of approval and concern. "You're holding up," he said, leaning against the counter, "but it's not going to be easy. Some of the old guard like Mike might push back." Ethan nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. "I can handle Mike. It's the customers I'm worried about. They don't trust us anymore." James's eyes softened. "Trust is earned, Ethan. You're already doing that. I got a call from Sarah Mitchell today. She's telling everyone at her school about you." Word spreading. Ethan's chest warmed at the mention of Sarah, the teacher he'd helped. "She didn't have to do that. She did," James said, "because you gave her a reason to believe in this place." As the shop closed, Ethan stayed late, poring over the refund list. The numbers were staggering, but each name heralded Sarah. Daniel was a person, not a transaction. He thought of his mother, Ellen, who'd always said honesty was the only currency that mattered. For the first time, Ethan felt like he was living up to that dot outside. The night air was crisp, the garage's neon sign buzzing faintly. Tommy lingered, helping Ethan lock up. "You're doing good, boss," he said, his grin genuine. Ethan smiled. The title's still foreign. "We're doing good, kid. Keep that spine you grew yesterday." As they parted ways, Ethan glanced back. At the shop, its silhouette a promise and a challenge. He was no longer just a mechanic. He was a leader, and Harper's was his to rebuild. The road ahead was rough, but for the first time, Ethan felt ready to drive it. The spring breeze carried the scent of fresh oil and blooming dogwoods through the open bay doors of Harper's Auto Repair, a far cry from the stale tension that had once choked the shop. 3 months had passed since Ethan Carter took the reins as manager, and the garage had transformed into something almost unrecognizable. The concrete floor gleamed under new LED lights, the cluttered tool racks were organized, and a freshly painted mural of a classic Mustang adorned the exterior wall, a gift from a local artist who'd heard of the shop's turnaround. Ethan, now 25, stood in the bay, his navy work shirt rolled up at the sleeves, reviewing a service schedule on his clipboard. His hazel eyes, once shadowed by defiance, now sparkled with quiet pride. Harper's wasn't just a garage anymore. It was a beacon, proof that doing right could rebuild what greed had broken. The shop's transformation hadn't come easily. Ethan's first weeks as manager had been a gauntlet of skeptical mechanics, wary customers, and a ledger bleeding red from refunds for Greg Marshall's scams. But Ethan had tackled each challenge with the same precision he brought to a seized engine. He'd implemented transparent pricing, trained the team on ethical service, and personally called every person on the refund list. Daniel Brooks, Harold Jenkins, Sarah Mitchell, and dozens more. Each conversation, each thank you, had chipped away at the shop's tarnished reputation, replacing it with trust. The numbers told the story. Customer reviews had surged, repair bookings doubled, and the shop was hiring for the first time in years. Today, Harper's buzzed with a different kind of energy. A community event planned by James Sullivan and championed by Ethan was set to kick off at noon. The lot was a carnival of activity, tables laden with barbecue and lemonade, a bounce house for kids, and a roped-off area where mechanics offered free tire rotations and fluid checks. A banner overhead read, "Harper's Auto Repair, driving trust forward." Ethan adjusted his tie, a rare sight. Borrowed from his mother's insistence, he looked apart and scanned the growing crowd. Families milled about, children clutching balloons, their chatter blending with the twang of a local band playing Johnny Cash covers. Tommy Hayes, Now a junior mechanic with a steadier hand jogged over, his grin wide. "Place is packed, boss. You see Sarah Mitchell yet? She brought her whole class." Ethan's eyes lit up. "She did? Where?" Tommy pointed to a group of kids near the bounce house, their teacher, Sarah, herding them with a laugh. Ethan made his way over, dodging a toddler with a balloon. Sarah spotted him, her dark hair loose today, her smile warm. "Ethan, this is amazing," she said, gesturing to the crowd. "The kids wanted to see the hero mechanic I keep talking about." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed. "Just doing my job." Sarah shook her head. "You're doing more than that. My principal's recommending Harper's to every teacher at school. You've changed things." Before Ethan could respond, a familiar figure approached Harold. Jenkins, his tweed jacket swapped for a plaid shirt, his steps lighter than Ethan remembered. "Thought I'd bring Clara to see what you've done," Harold said, his arm around a frail but smiling woman. Clara's eyes, the same kind ones from the photo Harold had shown months ago, met Ethan's. "You're the young man who kept my Harold on the road," Clara said, her voice soft but clear. "Thank you." Ethan's throat tightened. "Happy?" "To help, ma'am. How's the sedan holding up?" Harold chuckled. "Like a dream, thanks to you." As the Jenkinses mingled, Ethan's gaze drifted to James Sullivan, who stood near the barbecue, chatting with customers. James had shed his undercover trainee guise, his crisp button-down and easy smile marking him as the owner, though his sharp eyes still missed nothing. He'd been a constant presence, guiding Ethan through the chaos of management, auditing the other shops, and ensuring Greg's scams didn't resurface. James caught Ethan's eye and nodded, a silent acknowledgement of a job well done. The event's highlight came when James took the microphone, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Folks, thank you for being here," he began. "Harper's Auto Repair was built on a promise to fix cars, yes, but also to lift up this community. We lost our way for a while, but one man reminded us what matters." He gestured to Ethan, who froze, his tie suddenly feeling too tight. Ethan Carter didn't just fix cars. He fixed the shop's soul. Let's give him a hand. The crowd erupted in applause, kids cheering, mechanics whistling. Tommy whooped, nudging Ethan forward. Ethan stepped up, his face flushed, and took the mic. "I'm not big on speeches," he said, his voice steadying. "But I learned something here. Doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. This shop's yours now. Our promise to you is honesty, every time." The applause swelled again, and Ethan stepped down, his chest warm. Sarah handed him a lemonade, her eyes bright. "You're a natural," she teased. Ethan laughed, the tension easing. "Tell that to my nerves." As the event wound down, Ethan found James by the mural, the Mustang's curves gleaming under the sun. "You pulled it off," James said, his tone proud. "This shop's the model for the others now. I'm heading to the next location tomorrow. But I'll be back. You've got this." Ethan nodded, the weight of trust settling comfortably. "Thanks for giving me the shot." James clapped his shoulder. "You earned it." That evening, Ethan drove to his mother's small apartment, the event's energy still humming in his veins. Ellen greeted him with a hug, her wheelchair a familiar sight. "Heard about your big day," she said, her smile mirroring his. "Proud of you, Ethan." He sat beside her, sharing stories of the event, of Harold and Clara, of Sarah's kids. For the first time in years, Ethan felt unburdened, his dreams of engineering no longer a distant ache, but a possibility. He'd enrolled in night classes, a step toward the future he'd once abandoned. Harper's had given him more than a job. It had given him purpose. As the sun set, Ethan stood on the shop's lot, now quiet, the banner fluttering gently. He thought of Tom Harper, the man whose vision James had fought to preserve. Ethan hadn't known him, but he felt connected, a torchbearer for a legacy of trust. The road ahead would have bumps, but Ethan was ready, his hands steady, his heart full. This story of Harper's auto repair is more than a tale of wrenches and rotors. It's a testament to the power of integrity in a world too often driven by profit. Ethan Carter's journey shows us that heroism isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet choice to do right, even when it costs you. His compassion for Harold, Sarah, and Daniel reminds us that every person carries a story, and kindness can change its ending. James Sullivan's awakening as an owner underscores the responsibility of leadership to listen, to act, to rebuild what's broken. Together, they prove that trust, once shattered, can be mended with honesty and courage. The lessons are clear. Integrity is the foundation of any lasting success, and community thrives when we lift each other up. Ethan's stand against greed, Tommy's growth, and the shop's transformation inspire us to question the systems around us and choose the harder, truer path. In our own lives, we're all mechanics, fixing what we can, one choice at a time. If this story moved you, join us at Legacy Stories for more tales of triumph and humanity. Subscribe to our channel to catch every inspiring journey, and let's keep the spark of goodness alive. Thank you for being part of our community.